So Tulsi went on The View, which was a huge surprise to all of us. But of course, they did not pull any punches, and of course, as probably expected, all of those punches were illegitimate. I do want to go ahead and cover this video over the course of a few different videos because there is a lot of things to break down and honestly put back together. There were parts of the segment where most of the segment, 90% of the segment she did absolutely fantastic. But there is one part of the segment where me and her gotta talk, but that's not gonna be on this video. On this video, we're gonna focus on her comments, her exchange with Ana Navarro, where they discuss Venezuela. But before I go ahead and get into that clip, I would like to tell you all, go right now onto the MCSC Network YouTube page and watch the clip from the Convo Couch's Savage Cuts, where they have a video up right now showing how the SWAT team was called on protesters because they were basically trying to show how they felt about the fact that they were trying to shut down dispensaries in Pasadena, California, in the LA area, because of corporate greed. Why else, right? So go check that out. But in the meantime, let's check out this clip.
Influence in Syria than ever before.
Tulsi, you and I know each other, and you and I have had these discussions and arguments over text and over phone. I've told you how much, yes, how we disagree. People text, right? I'm not how we disagree on this issue. We've had it on the phone as well. I'm very troubled by the tweets about Venezuela that you've put out. We've talked about that. What Maduro is doing to the people of Venezuela. There's over 3 million that have been displaced. People are starving. He's not allowing humanitarian aid in. He is a thug. He is a dictator. He is corrupt. And I am very supportive of what the United States is doing right now, leading the solidarity and support of freedom-loving Venezuelans and putting sanctions, economic and sanctions. Why are you so against intervention in Venezuela? Not military intervention, but what we are doing.
Because every time the United States, and particularly in Latin America, has gotten involved in regime change, using different tools to enact that regime change, there have been both short and long-term devastating impacts. If there are ways that we can work with surrounding countries to try to get humanitarian aid into people there, then we should be doing that. But for the United States to go in and choose who should be the leader of Venezuela, that is not something that serves the interests of the Venezuelan people. That's something that they need to determine themselves.
But the U.S. is not choosing who's going to be the leader of Venezuela. It's millions of Venezuelans marching on the streets. But do you put military intervention on the same level that you put economic and diplomatic efforts?
The United States has used both military, CIA, sanctions, and other tools to intervene and enact regime change in countries around the world. Iran is a great example. The CIA led a covert operation to overthrow the government in Iran decades ago in Mossadegh. This led to decades upon decades of hardship and suffering and authoritarian governments, and has led us to the place where we're dealing with many challenges today from Iran.
Okay, so Tulsi did a fantastic job answering that question. And basically all I would like to do is add a little bit more on. But first, I feel like it's important to address what Ana Navarro is saying. And also important to address the fact that Meghan McCain was really bothered by what was said about the texting. Woman, I don't know who you think you are. It was your dad that was important. We don't even know what you did before now. I didn't even know that you were on The View. I didn't even know that you were John McCain's daughter until a few months ago. So what, you thought that she was going to text you for what? Tulsi doesn't like warmongers. Your dad was the warmonger. Why would she be texting you? I'm just saying, what, so you could text her dad and have them set up and organize a drone strike on Tulsi? Yeah, okay, nah, good luck with that. So you're weird for being weirded out about that. Like, her face was just disgusting and entitled. Like, I did not like it. It was cringeworthy. Let me just go ahead and say that. Now, I also think it's important to address not only what Tulsi said, but mostly what Ana said and the misconceptions there. I don't like the gaslighting. When they say, quote unquote, millions of Venezuelans have been displaced, they always leave out the fact that that is about 98% white middle class to upper middle class, if not wealthy Venezuelans. Now, the super wealthy Venezuelans stay there because they actually have an incentive to stay in Venezuela that is usually given to them by America in one form or another. But the Venezuelans who are displaced are, I mean, I live in Miami. They will tell you that they will even tell you that most of the things of what Ana Navarro is saying is untrue. Like the idea that there is a quote unquote food shortage that is caused by Maduro. That is actually not the case. A company, and I really just forgot the name of the company right now. Oh my gosh. That's neither here nor there because that's easy to look up. But the company that actually controls a lot of the food production in Venezuela refuses to release the food. And the same thing with the manufacturing. They will actually hoard the food and the clothes, like anything that they have control over. They will put it in a warehouse and not release it as a tactic to get the people to turn against Maduro. Why would they do that? Well, because those are corporations. Maduro doesn't like corporations, and neither did Hugo Chavez. And when people are being misleading and saying that Maduro isn't doing a good job with the economy, it needs to be addressed because the economy is oftentimes if it isn't murder, they will use the economy to say, we need to overthrow the government, right? But it's always ironic, and I'm gonna explain to you why. They said, because she said sanctions, right? And I love when they use that word because they don't even realize how stupid that shit sounds. You know what? I'm for sanctions against the government if it'll protect the people of the country, because the best way to make sure that people can afford to do the basic and buy the basic things that they need to survive is to make sure that they don't have the money to afford the basic things they can buy. I don't think she knows what sanctions is. I think some of these people just throw out words. They don't know what they mean. But sanctions means you don't give the government money. So on top of the United States trying to cut off Venezuela from the Western economy, they're also causing inflation. In fact, 70% of the inflation that Venezuela deals with is from the United States. Because for a long time, Venezuela was on the petrodollar. Now, obviously, Saudi Arabia is also in control of the petrodollar, but they kind of work in tandem in that regard. But they can do what they want to make Venezuela look like their money isn't worth a damn thing. Because Venezuela won't play ball, because Venezuela won't give control of their country to the oligarchs. And this isn't the first time we've seen this. So another example of this would be, go ahead and guess what I'm going to say. You're damn right. Like I always say, Cuba. What did they say about Cuba? Fidel Castro did such a horrible job with the economy. They were doing so well before. Why? Because they weren't in an embargo and being sanctioned by the entire Western civilization. And they were also doing what the United States told them to do, or more specifically, what the United States oligarchy told them to do. And so, of course, they were doing much better. But what I mean by they were doing much better, I mean, in case you didn't know, Cuba was an apartheid state and they were segregated at the time Fidel Castro took over, which is why it was so easy for him to start a revolution, because it was actually based on racial economic injustices. So they were doing great, but only a certain sect of the country was doing great. Now, afterwards, in order to protect information from getting out, to tell the real history of what was happening in Cuba, because the former regime before Fidel Castro, and it was indeed a regime, was ran by Batista, who was, quite frankly, America's little bitch. He was communist also. But they used the excuse that communism was the problem in Cuba. But that was never the problem in Cuba, nor is it the problem now. It was being cut off from the Western world. And not all of Cuba, by the way, is doing bad. Matter of fact, they have a 99% literacy rate. They have a 50% male, 50% female legislature, which actually makes most of the decisions. Fidel Castro is more the commander-in-chief, more than the policy advisor. There was nothing brutal about Fidel Castro in the later years whenever the situation with Cuba calmed down. However, He probably was brutal while he was in the middle of a revolution. When you have to be that way, because last time I checked, America didn't play fair. So I would expect that out of somebody who was trying to desegregate his country, give healthcare to everybody, have a 99% literacy rate. Oh, and by the way, they discovered a cure for lung cancer and put it in a damn inhaler while being cut off from the rest of the Western world. An inhaler. You know, I got an inhaler right here. I can drop my phone, y'all. Hold on, where my inhaler at? I got an inhaler right here. They put the cure, the same cure that we supposedly can't get, right? We got to go through chemotherapy. They put it in here. Now I don't have lung cancer anymore. But hey, let's go ahead and keep talking about, it's Fidel's fault that all that happened too then, right? Because that happened in spite of the sanctions. Same thing under Hugo Chavez and Maduro. The reason why they ramp up the animosity in these countries is because, well, they're successful, and they're successful under a socialist-esque regime. And because of that, that means equity. That means they will nationalize their oil, which is what Hugo Chavez did. Once again, Iran is another example of this. So what she's saying about sanctions is ignorant, because the only people who are hurt by sanctions are the people. The government, truth be told, is going to be all right. But they always try to convince you that the sanctions are the problem, but the sanctions hurt the people. Now, they know that the sanctions are going to hurt the people, right? Because then the people will believe it's the government. That's the problem, rather than being exposed to outside or international sources that will eventually tell them, well, it's actually the United States, as usual, right? So, and on top of all that, sanctions, when she said, if you care about humanitarian aid, well, how can you, I'm like, humanitarian. You said sanctions. Just you want to hurt, because I just told you who sanctions hurt. This isn't me making this up. This is a fact. It hurts the people. So what's the problem? What is the issue? Now, she also said, why are you against humanitarian aid to Venezuela and the people? Well, for one, in which Abby Martin put this beautifully, because the idiot Marco Rubio was we're sitting here ready, in Colombia to deliver humanitarian aid to Venezuela, but they won't let us pass their borders. And then Abby Martin said brilliantly on Twitter, oh, how nice of them to finally give the aid that was supposed to be going to Venezuela 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, conveniently, as they're trying to overthrow the government. How sweet. Because like I just told you, they don't have a shortage of anything. Food, clothes. And it's the weird stuff. Like the food, actually, they're not in a shortage, but like little things, like butter, for example, not even joking, cooking oil. They'll hold that stuff up. They won't stop you from buying t-shirts and shoes and pants, but they'll make it hard to buy like underwear or socks. They'll make it easy to buy a toothbrush, but make it a little bit more difficult to buy toothpaste. That's what they do. It's little irritable things like that rile people up, and that's where it comes from. But if you watch the interview by the Real News Network, they did a fantastic job displaying exactly who's on Maduro's side and who's not. And it's the same thing that we saw throughout history. Whether it be in Grenada, whether it be in Cuba, whether it be in South Africa, whether any other country that is kind of like in an apartheid situation, the indigenous and the black people and the poor people support Maduro. The white people run, and they point at that government as to all their problems because, well, let's be honest, right? Do rich people in this government in America get it right when we're talking politics? No, they don't. 98% of the time. Most rich people have no idea what the hell they're talking about. They're in a little bubble. They're benefiting from the status quo. Why would they at all think that it needs to be changed? Right? So in this country, but when do rich people in almost any country get it right? If you want to know if a government is doing well or not, talk to the poor people, talk to the disenfranchised, talk to the marginalized. That's how you know where the heart of the people lie. And their hearts lie with Venezuela, or with Maduro, for better or for worse. That's their choice. They elected him. Now, even with that knowledge, they will still say things like, well, look at the protests. But what they won't say is that whenever it comes on CNN, right? The protests come on CNN, they'll say, wow, look at all those people protesting against Maduro. Because international sources, independent sources are all like, they're going to these places and interviewing. And they're saying, no, we're protesting American imperialism. Yeah. But they don't do the research. They do as much research as MSNBC. Right? And I do want to lastly address this part. Well, they'll say, Maduro's a brutal dictator. Okay, I'll bite. How? What did he do? What did he do? He's a brutal dictator. What did he do? Did he invest millions of dollars from our very own State Department to push propaganda against his government? No. All right. Did he authorize drone strikes and kill millions or hundreds of thousands overseas and sell weapons to Saudi Arabia to kill Yemeni people? Or even give billions to another country which is in an act of apartheid and pretend that it's the only real democracy in the Middle East? No. What did he do? And where's the proof? And according to whom is he a brutal dictator? What, according to people like Meghan McCain's father? May he rest in hell? And I mean that sincerely. And anybody who wants to quote me on that, perfectly fine with it. By the way, I absolutely refuse to allow a man who would cheer on the deaths of innocent people of color in some faux display of patriotism to be cheered on like he's some celebratory veteran that should be revered. I'll be damned. I'm a veteran. I've seen veterans who should be revered because of their heroism. He isn't one of them. And I hope that McCain's daughter understands that. Tulsi Gabbard is a veteran that should absolutely be revered because she saw what happens when you go to war. She's seen casualties. She's seen what it looks like when dictators and warmongers and oligarchs send you off to a war you should have never been in to begin with and demonize people who did absolutely nothing wrong but live their lives. And Tulsi, as well as most veterans who have been to war, understand if a revolution is to come, it has to come from the people, not some external government. Even if Nicolas Maduro was a dictator, then guess what? His people are to determine how to deal with him, not the United States of America. And let me just end on this note. All that BS about humanitarian aid needs to stop. Send it out the window. Guess who was the leader in humanitarian aid to Syria from 2011 up to this point, which coincidentally enough, was the point where the Syrian civil war began? It was the United States. How many people have died since that humanitarian aid began? Guess who was the leader in humanitarian aid to Libya? The United States. A lot of that humanitarian aid went to Chad, who at that time was overrun by a brutal dictator that we put into power. And guess who was the leader in humanitarian aid back in the day? To Cuba, before Fidel overthrew them. Believe it or not, guess who was one of our main weapons traders in the Middle East? Before there was Israel, there was Iran. That was our business partner until Mossadegh took over. Every time we give humanitarian aid out of the goodness of our little hearts. It's never humanitarian aid. It's weapons. It's bullets. And they don't go to the people. They go to rebel insurgents whom we pay. So I am getting sick and tired of these millionaires who don't know how to pick up a damn book or even use a Google search engine, dictating how America should feel about the leaders and the problems of other countries. Because if they did any iota of research, they know that most of it is based on unequivocal lies. But let's be honest. They don't get paid to tell the truth. The reason they get paid so much is because they're willing to lie to the American people, even at the American people's expense. What Tulsi said is true. Every time we give humanitarian aid, it never turns out well. Slaves, Libya, right now. But you want to talk about humanitarian? Nah. You want to pull the wool over my eyes? You want to pull the wool over the eyes of America? It isn't happening anymore. Knowledge is power. Thanks for watching that segment of Mi Casa es Su Casa. You can donate to our Patreon and keep helping the network grow by clicking on the link in the description below. And also, make sure you join us at JustNForm.com. And finally, make sure you subscribe to us on Roku and be part of the very first independent news network on Roku TV. But more than anything else, always remember, find your balance. Peace.